One of the strangest and most interesting impulses human beings have is that of morbid curiosity, the desire to see something that may very well scar you for life. It's the reason why websites like Ludvig exist, it's the reason why people slow down whenever they see a car crash, and it's the reason why a preteen version of me had a very difficult time falling asleep after one of my friend's older brothers showed me in gruesome detail a map of Call of Duty zombies. Northern France, 1918, an excavation site where something went horribly wrong. It would be a few years before I had decided to brave Origins again, but this next time around I ended up developing a bit of an obsession for these desolate trenches. If you ask me what my personal depiction of hell would look like, it would probably be pretty similar to my middle school, but if you ask me what a general depiction of hell would look like, I'd reckon it would be very similar to this. A war-torn village, mud, snow and dirty water pooling on the craters of countless dropped shells, wounds inflicted on the very land. Omens to death everywhere you look. Soldiers impaled, graves, piles of bones on the ground, and of course, the very zombies you fight against. Their bodies are riddled with holes, exposed bones, missing jaws, rounds enlarged on their very faces in an attempt to halt their advance. I really like the attention to detail. Some of the zombies are wrapped in barbed wire, as it wasn't enough to stop them from falling into the trenches in pursuit of the living. Neither were the bullets, or the mud, or the cold. Are they in pain? They sure sound like they are. You can try to fend them off, put them down once and for all, the last man standing in this place that can only be described as a hellscape. A battle you fight on the land, invisible to greater forces, fighting a war on a far grander scale. Above you, countless airplanes are engaged in an endless dogfight, circling the battlefield like vultures, patiently waiting for the moment the last man falls. Robots the size of buildings patrol the war zone, completely indifferent to the horrors they're stepping over. It's a 1918, why the fuck are there robots here? Their fight is in a completely different magnitude, but it is a fight nonetheless. And in a tormented place like this one, it doesn't really matter how prepared you are. Soldiers, tanks, airplanes, hell doesn't really care how intimidating you look. Once you're there, you're just another soul. To be dead in a place like this is almost certainly preferable to being alive, and I feel like this is the core component of Grimdark. Origins gave me an obsession for this sort of aesthetic long before I ever heard the word Grimdark for the first time. And at that time, I just couldn't wrap my head around how nobody ever thought of making more media with this aesthetic. Of course, I simply didn't know that this was an entire subgenre. Fast forward to 2020, things are going great as I'm sure you remember. I was scrolling through Reddit one day and I found a single picture that instilled in me the same morbid curiosity I had developed in Origins. Tasked with instilling the fear of God in the troops, the orthodoxy officer keeps the soldiers on the path of righteousness and punishes those who transgress. They are protected by their unwavering faith as well as the saints they revere. Is this person some official of some army? He bears chainmail like a medieval knight, is covered in holy symbols implying some ecclesiastical role of some sort, but above all else, the gas mask implies that he's somewhere that uses chemical weapons. And we didn't even touch on those 7 hands nailed to the board like some sort of depraved exaltation of the Lord. Just by the way they're arranged, I am pressed to believe that perhaps they were nailed first and then severed. This is fucked, and I need more of it. And imagine my surprise when I found out that this was one of dozens of conceptual artworks depicting the awesome, but by all means horrible world of the Trench Crusade. A passion project by concept artist Mike Francina. This is, without a shadow of a doubt, the best and most interesting visual storytelling I have ever seen. I mean this as a compliment. I wish my mind was this fucked up. 1099, during the First Crusade, Jerusalem was captured by the Templar Knights. As they're prospecting the holiest of temples, they find secret vaults containing ancient relics. Among them lies a demonic artifact that speaks to the greed and malice in the hearts of men. In that year, the first heresy was committed, as the knights strayed from the light of God to commune with the artifact. Unspeakable rites were committed, and a portal to hell is opened right there in the holy city. Hell and earth fused into one, and thus began an 8th century war that still wages to the present day. This is the Trench Crusade. This is an unreleased board game, by the way. Did I mention that? The world of the Trench Crusade is handcrafted to be as abhorrent as possible, regardless of who you are. It is also a world that has as one of its main events, 1899, Church Space Program commences. The Orthodoxy officer is already a pretty good example of how being on the quote-unquote good side absolutely does not guarantee that you'll be having a good time. You can either choose between serving a tyrannical, sadistic god or ontologically evil demon lords. The only thing that is guaranteed to you once you are born into this world is that you will suffer a lot. Once you're in there, there is no easy way out. Suicide is a mortal sin, after all. Ending your life is an outright rejection of God's gift, and that means that you will suffer for the rest of the eternity in hell. So realistically, the only choice that you have is to fight in the war. If you are a sufficiently devoted soldier, you might as well go to heaven, assuming of course that the gates are still open. But even if they aren't, God has other plans for its subjects. Take for example the Butchered Saint. The description reads, "Martyred by the heretic legions, but kept alive by the grace of God." Okay, so I'm not sure if I'm allowed to show this on YouTube on account of the gore, but it's basically a lady with the entire front half of her body missing, including the internal organs. And she is wearing a mask, so I guess she could be smiling underneath that, I don't know. This is what devotion grants you. It feels like the world is intrinsically sadistic, both in its blessings and its punishments. Another good example is the Shrine Anchorite, which is a piece of towering power armor that is adorned with holy texts and relics in its interior, as well as hooks, blades, and barbed wire, so that the pilot may suffer as their lord once did. Another example are the Sniper Priests, who blind themselves in ritualistic devotion to their god and let their lord guide their aim through faith. The farthest confirmed kill came from a shot fired 3 miles away. For reference, as of the writing of this video, the longest sniper shot on Earth was set by Vyacheslav Kowalski in Ukraine in 2024, at a distance of 2.36 miles. A common theme you may have noticed is that in the world of the Trench Crusade, pain is a currency. If you want to be powerful, or actually if you just want to have the slightest fighting chance, you need to show your devotion in blood. Regardless of what lord you are serving, you must show them a sufficient sacrifice, and in this world any semblance of power and freedom can only be attained through great sacrifices. Yet in a very grim twist, too much devotion can lend you an awful reward like that of the Butchered Saint or even the Martyred Penitent, which depending on how you interpret the description can actually be having a pretty chill time. I think that this is probably the greatest example of Grimdark because this is a world where regardless of your position, devotion or alliance, there is no painless option. The best thing you could be in the world of the Trench Crusade is to not be conceived at all. The second best thing you could be is an ordinary soldier, not exceptional enough that you're deemed too important to die, but not faithless enough to the point where you're tortured, punished, or condemned to Gehenna. And even if you die and go to heaven, I'm not sure if that's a good place to be at either. Maybe it's a place where you're forced to spend an eternity in servitude, forcefully prostrated and made to chant hymns to the Lord until your vocal cords burst. We don't really get to see what heaven is like in the world of the Trench Crusade, and I feel like that is a very interesting and appropriate choice. One of the core aspects of Grimdark is that there is very little hope for a better future. Things are very unlikely to get better, but they absolutely can get worse. Speaking of which, let's talk about the other side of the war. The heretic legions are the ones who decided to rebel against the tyrannical god ruling above them. A full third of humanity fell from grace, opting instead to pledge their allegiance to the lords of hell. So in 1914, which is when the Trench Crusade takes place, that's going to be around 600 million people. I say, confidently, completely disregarding the fact that the population of a version of Earth that's been immersed in a 800-year-old war is probably going to be different from regular Earth. This video won't make enough money for me to bother calculating that, but I can rephrase that if it makes it feel better. So in 1914, which is when the Trench Crusade takes place, that's going to be at most 600 million people. But even so, becoming a member of the heretic legions is not a painless path. Regardless of what lord you choose to follow, you must suffer for them. Anyone who wishes to serve the lords of hell must make a pilgrimage through the Valley of Tears and make their ways to the gates of Gehenna, which are eternally burning bronze gates that sear the flesh of those who approach from miles away until the pain becomes unbearable. But gritting through the pain is not enough, as the gates of Gehenna are only open to those whose heart is sufficiently black. Those who are not wicked enough are reduced to carbonized bodies littering the lands, some still wailing in agony, stuck in a place between life and death. Barring this initiation ritual, one would think that the heretic legions have it a little better than the rest of the god-aligned legions. But the truth is that, like I said earlier, this isn't a world where not suffering is an option. Though if I'm being honest, the heretic trooper does seem like he's having a pretty chill time as well. Those both wicked and ambitious enough may make it past the gates and make the pilgrimage to the lake of fire as ordained by their infernal masters, where, upon committing blasphemous rites within its shores, their bodies are forever deformed and charred. Should they survive the flames, they are deemed worthy of becoming an anointed one, a special type of super soldier adorned with heavy armor and a flamethrower that uses the very pitch of the lake of fire as fuel. And like, I could go on about all the other soldiers and monsters of the Trench Crusade, but there are like 6 factions and a whole ass lore document that I read in preparation of this video. This world is very, very fascinating, and if it interested you, I highly recommend that you give it a read and go support the creators. And no, they didn't pay me to say this. Look at my sub count. Do I look like I get sponsor deals? Following suit to the vibe and the feeling of the Trench Crusade, we have yet another game that I've become obsessed with, even though it hasn't come out yet. I'll fucking put the Doofenshmir's meme here. Let me introduce you to the Forever Winter. Holy shit, this name goes so hard. This is probably the best title you could give to a Grimdark World, as nothing quite encapsulates the idea better than those 3 words. In case you're unfamiliar with the concept of winter, which is a pretty good guess considering the direction the world is headed, it is a 3-month period where days tend to be shorter, colder, and somewhat darker. Plants stop growing, the seasonal depression kicks in, and unless it's Christmas and you have a stable relationship with your family, you're probably gonna feel quite miserable. For the great majority of human history, winter is associated with survival. You need to stock up on food and fuel and endure a trimester of cold darkness. Everything is harsher during the winter. It is a moment when life needs to focus on surviving. Plants shed their leaves to conserve resources, animals hibernate to conserve energy, and biology pretty unanimously enters a state of waiting for spring. But what if spring never comes? The last cycle of seasons has already passed, and the world has been thrown into a perpetual state of scarcity as a global war rages on. Crops will no longer grow. The animals are much better off simply not waking up. Those who are still alive must fight for survival, scavenging tech, food and water and anything else they can get their hands on to endure a storm of fire and metal. It is very hard to get footage for this game on account of it being in closed beta, but from the gameplay trailer and the footage I stole, we can get a pretty good grasp on what this world is like. And as you can imagine, nobody is having a good time. A global war has been waging for countless decades, maybe even centuries. Both the politicians and the reasons for the start of this conflict have been lost to time. Now the entire world is aggression for aggression's sake, as millions are sent to their deaths by the artificial intelligences controlling each army. Impossibly complex algorithms programmed with the simple directive of complete annihilation of the enemy. And in accordance to one of the core tenets of Grimdark, you are not the one dishing out the damage, single-handedly slaying entire enemy armies. You are just a little scavenger, tasked with salvaging whatever you can to guarantee your own survival. But the question to ask is whether a world like this is even worth surviving. I very much doubt that there is a god in the world of Forever Winter that will punish those who forfeit from this literal hell on Earth. And yet, the scavs fight on, like people tend to do in any apocalypse. All of biology is hard-coded to keeping you alive, and by all accounts it's pretty good at it. It probably has something to do with the 3.7 billion years of experience. Scenarios like this put the mind against the senses. It is the fear of death versus the fear of pain. And yet, you need to get used to both of them in order to survive. It's not like you have any other choice when the entire world is a homage to destruction. When you have tanks and cannons completely adorned with bodies, atmospheres of hellfire and abyssal black. When you have whole geological formations, mountains and valleys not of earth, but of flesh, steel and concrete. What hope can you find in a world where flowers no longer bloom? Very little. And yet the sheer fact that people are willing to keep going is surprisingly hopeful in and of itself. Is the point of survival to simply live to see another day, or to endure until a moment when life gets better? That is a question better left for the philosophers. This video is pretentious enough as it is. And fuck, I just realized that I didn't write the segue for the next part of the video. If the previous 2 worlds represented agony, this one represents hopelessness. In the others, it was very likely that you would go out with a bang, but here, you have no choice but to go out with a whimper. The world of Vermis is best described by the incredible sense of loneliness that it gives off. It is a world that has already seen its best days, and truthfully, it probably already seen its worst days too. There isn't much left to it, short of a few vagrant souls and scattered ruins. And just like the previous 2 games, this one also pertains to an unreleased game, so I'm gonna put the Doofenshmir's meme here again. But this game is not ever going to be released, as Vermis is a very interesting world-building project that tells a story through a game manual, and they do an excellent job at it. The world of Vermis is an exhausted one. It could try to take you down through violence, but more often than not, you'll see that it will try to wear you down through painful, long and arduous journeys. If the other worlds were like a cheetah that chases its prey down to maul it in one go, Vermis is like a persistence hunter, a predator that may not be as fast as its prey, but one that never stops chasing. Eventually, you will get tired, and that's when it gets you. One example would be the region known as a Silver Swamp. Quote, "Once you cross the mist, the atmosphere will be filled with a violent silence that only ceases when your feet step in the water. Your eyelids are getting heavier and your body feels tired. The swamp is a land of illusions and apparitions. The ghosts of those who never came back from the mist are now damned to wander around these silvery waters for eternity." Unquote. This description should already have given you a pretty good idea of what the swamp is like. The longer the player character wanders through it, the harder it is to stay awake. You start to see illusions. A sorrowful damsel that looks at you from a distance, a man who is always facing away from you no matter where you try to look at him from, the figure of a faceless mother holding a newborn child. With every step you take, your eyelids feel heavier. Sometimes you fall asleep mid-walk and stumble forward. It becomes harder and harder to retain consciousness. You know very well that should you fall to slumber, your soul will forever be claimed by the swamp. But can you muster the will to keep going? Let's assume you do. The weak-willed are plentiful in this world, but they don't make it very far. Right after the swamp, you find yourself at the Flutewood Forest. The trees are hollowed out and full of holes. That way, whenever the weather is particularly windy, the entire forest plays a haunting melody. It is very unlikely that you'll be able to fall asleep here, but as you proceed, you manage to find a small cabin where you can rest. It doesn't have any windows, perhaps to insulate the sound of the trees. It's an odd architectural choice, but it will do for now. You make your way inside, light up the fireplace, and drift unto sleep. Your dream is very pleasant. You find yourself in a beautiful land brimming with life. The sky is blue, the grass is green, the waters are crystal clear, and you can feel the warm sunlight in your skin. It is the most comfortable thing you felt during your entire journey. You'd stay in this place forever if you could. Suddenly you wake up in a cold sweat. You try to catch your breath, only to realize that it's not only incredibly difficult to breathe, but to move as well. Something makes a muffled sound. It could be the howling melody outside, but it sounds like some sort of deep guttural hymn in an unknown language. It is almost deafening at this point. You know it in your heart that you need to get out of there, no matter the cost. These are just two of many examples. The world of Vermis is tailor-made to wear you down bit by bit until giving up is just the most sensible option, and then that is it. You can tell by the very dungeon design, swamps, howling forests, labyrinths and crypts that feel like they extend for eternity. The few vagrant souls you find on your path are almost always downtrodden in some way. Dying, desperate and hopeless, made this way by a world that has been abandoned by grace. To my knowledge, there's nothing that explains what exactly happened to the world of Vermis. The best explanation that I could come up with is simply erosion. The passage of time has not been kind to this world, as even the most grandiose and immutable figures have already seen their last days. Case in point, the beginning of the game takes place in a graveyard shaded by the corpse of a fallen god. There is nothing left to hear your prayers here, so your only option is to seek strength in your own volition. Whether or not this is a hopeful message will probably depend on how positive or negative your worldview is. Grimdark as a whole, in its themes, aesthetics and stories, is made to be as miserable as possible. It is not only its main goal, but also its main appeal. But a very odd and interesting side effect is that you can tell some surprisingly hopeful stories through it, of people who endure a world that is throwing everything it has at them, but they always get back up. But there are arguments saying that true Grimdark cannot have a hopeful message or a happy ending, so alternatively you could always make the character go through hell only to have him die in the end or whatever. It would be very morbid and I would argue a little funny. But regardless of that, I think it's a disservice to say that Grimdark is simply misery for misery's sake. As I hope I have been able to show you in this video, you can make some really fascinating world-building projects with Grimdark themes. Morbidity is interesting, even if it comes with some of the most terrifying concepts you could possibly conceive. Above all else, a grim setting allows you to use more unconventional storytelling methods. The bad guys can win, the stories can have bigger stakes, and the protagonists can be subjected to consequences and behaviors that are otherwise unfitting of other stories. Anything goes, really, except for the shit at middle school, fuck that. Hi, hello, it's me again, and I have announcements. I have now started to fuck around on Twitch, so if you want to interact with me in a more direct way, there's your chance. Enjoy it while I'm still small. Oh, but Hadel, I hate Twitch, why don't you just stream here on YouTube? I will eventually stream to both, but to do that I need to be either rich or smart, and I am neither, so I'm just gonna go with Twitch. Even though streaming to YouTube would be smarter for my growth, I just prefer the Twitch chat culture, so yeah. Here's my schedule, by the way. I'm going to be playing Signalis very soon. Like, as soon as I post this video, the next stream will be Signalis, and I would really, really appreciate it if I had you there. That's gonna be it for me, bros. I will see you on the next one. Take care.